Just like in the great stories, Mr. Frodo. The ones that really mattered.
I love theme. It essentially is the connective tissue between characters, narrative, plot beats, tropes, and allows me to see the story at a different level, engage with it deeper, and draw some meaning to the story. On the flip side of that, if you don't have a theme in mind when you go to write, then why write at all?
Whenever I leave a movie theater or I put down a book and I just feel hollow and empty, for me, that's usually when there is either no theme or I just didn't pick up on the theme. Theme to me is like the lifeblood of stories.
After you.
Why? So you can stab me in the back?
No. Because it's polite. Aunt Lucy said if we're kind and polite, the world will be right.
Theme is not just like a topic like war or politics or love. It's a specific argument that the story is trying to make. How war dehumanizes people or how love is possessive. Flannery O'Connor says it really well. A story is a way to say something that can't be said in any other way. Different artists have different philosophies when it comes to themes. Some feel that it gives it purpose, but there are other artists that feel that it becomes too preachy and stories are mainly for entertainment and not necessarily for these morals. Oscar Wilde even has a quote, "All art is quite useless." And I think a lot of modern stories have kind of fallen into this philosophy where entertainment is above all else when it comes to stories. If there is a theme, it's very, very repetitive. It's something about it's good to work together, or if you believe and you make the right choices, then evil will perish.
Because that's what heroes do.
That's, I think, what happens when theme just goes to the wayside and when it's not given proper purpose, it begins to wither away. When it comes to themes, we like to think of it in two separate categories, one being conscious themes and one being subconscious themes.
Subconscious themes really resonate with me. Basically, symbols and meanings, they arrive more organically through the narrative. They're not pushed by the author. They essentially allow for nuance within the story. So the reader can discover the meaning of the story and they can dissect different parts of the story, whether it be the characters or the plot beats. Oftentimes these stories, they feel very organic, they aren't very preachy, and the characters, a lot of times they just feel real. Now, same thing with those styles when it comes to these themes that are subconscious. Sometimes the narrative can feel a little more scattered, can be muddied, or even contradictory. If you miss the theme when it becomes sort of muddied or a little distracting even because it's more nuanced, you think that the story is pointless or doesn't make any sense. And so you can misinterpret what the author may have been going for. So that's something to look out for.
Now, conscious themes break up into two separate categories. The first category for me is direct theme, which is there is one meaning and one purpose directed by the author with very little room for nuance. Ayn Rand falls really well into this, Terry Goodkind. Both of them talk in interviews and such about how their stories are more a vehicle to push their philosophy and less about entertainment as a whole. The other category I just like to call subtle themes. It is less of a direct argument that the author is making and more of a conversation, and the author will not give an answer necessarily to the thematic question. Examples of this are Clair Obscur, Inception, Gone Girl. Christopher Nolan is a great example of this. A lot of his stories will pose a question but not necessarily answer the question. It will just pose it for the reader and let them mull it over themselves. Video games are actually really good at this because they don't necessarily have to give one ending, where you can have different arguments to the same theme and let the player literally choose what the thematic answer is. The pros of conscious theming is you have like strong thematic cohesion because you know where you're going, and they have a lot of clarity with their themes. Now, some of the cons, characters can feel like mouthpieces, and it can break a lot of immersion because it feels like the story is just there to push a motive rather than being a narrative that the reader can enjoy.
A good option when thinking about conscious and subconscious themes here is try to strike a chord between both, where you do a first draft as a discovery writer or maybe an outliner if you're plotting, and you find out what themes are coming through and then trim back some of the excess and things that aren't ringing as true or things that aren't really hitting, and focus more on the main theme that came out when you were doing those first drafts.
To me, Allegory is theme gone wrong. Take Pilgrim's Progress, for instance. This is an extreme example, but in the story of Pilgrim's Progress, they're walking through Vanity Fair, and they're going through the Valley of Humiliation and passing through the River of Death. These are very, very clear, almost beating you over the head with what the thematic meaning is. Now, these stories can be interesting if that's the purpose, but normally you want to avoid something that clear. A lot of criticism of Terry Goodkind with the Sword of Truth books is a lot of the narrative beats and a lot of the story story feels like it's Terry Goodkind sitting the reader down and teaching them a lesson about life. And it's not really a story about the characters. It's more the person who is right, and everyone who disagrees with this one person is an evil psychopath. And there's no nuance with the theme, there's no actual argument. A better approach for this is Tolkien's philosophy. He believed much more in application versus allegory. There are hundreds of different ways that you can take his stories and apply them to your life. Tolkien's books helped lots of people go through lots of difficult times in their lives, and not every single one of them had to be allegorically parallel with what the story was intended to be about. It gives people meaning and it gives people purpose outside of exactly like Pilgrim's Progress or exactly like the Sword of Truth wanted their themes to be. This to me is the basis for application, allowing your audience to find their own meaning, but also having your own thematic direction.
So I find that allegory can be rather limiting to the audience. If it resonates with you, or if you agree with it, you find it very important or poignant for your life. But if you don't, then it loses the flavor, essentially. And I think that's why Tolkien really sought to have a very nuanced world. He very famously wasn't a big fan of Chronicles of Narnia. Now, while the two were amazing, great friends, Tolkien never really enjoyed Narnia because it was so allegorical. It was very heavy-handed with its themes, and Lewis was fine with that. He thought that that was important.
Now, allegory is more of an older approach to narrative. I think most modern stories have almost swung to the entire opposite end of the spectrum, where they're almost scared to posit a theme, and I think a lot of that is because themes can be very divisive. Certain thematic endings have had people leave a theater angry. They have made people put down books and never pick them back up again. But I think if you do them well, they can give your story so much strength. When you're not doing an allegory, themes can be very subtle. I recently totally misunderstood the themes of Starship Troopers, and a very patient and kind commenter corrected me on it. Themes are sometimes very hard to pick up on. As an example, there was a game recently called Detroit Become Human, where a lot of people thought that the themes were talking about the civil rights movement, and David Cage, the writer of the game, had to come out and say, no, these are not the themes. Now, you can totally disagree with him. It's not necessarily our job as creators to tell the audience that they're wrong with their thematic understanding, but you have to be wary of this when you're creating your stories.
So what Jesse was hitting on was what Roland Barthes made famous with the death of the author. He said, in quote, "The scripter exists to produce, but not to explain the work, and is born simultaneously with the text." He goes on to say that origin of meaning lies exclusively in language itself and its impressions on the reader. We cannot know the intended meaning by the author. We have to create our own theme and our own meaning, our own symbolism from the text. To piggyback off this idea, there are numerous books that are classics that are often misinterpreted when it comes to their theme. Think about Dune. Often people think that Paul Atreides is a hero, someone who should be looked up to as the chosen one, when Herbert was really trying to tell a cautionary tale about who you choose as your messiah. Other books like Moby Dick is another really famous one where people saw Ahab as someone who is brave and someone to look up to because he overcame or because he tried to kill Moby Dick. And again, this is another cautionary tale from Melville. He was trying to show us what happens when you become so obsessed with something and you want to do it with everything in your being to take down this thing. Same thing with the whale itself was people saw it as something that was evil when really it's just a creature, and that Captain Ahab has placed more onto this thing than he should have. And that's where it's another caution to what do you give credence to and how do you view the world, and to be careful about how much power you give to things. A lot of these books, they're classics, but again, we sometimes misinterpret what the author intended to tell to the readers. I think it's great to take a look back at these and to find out what the author was trying to say.
One of the dangers, I think, of approaching themes that the way that modern stories have, when you say nothing, you let your plot speak for itself, which sometimes can be very dangerous. A lot of grimdark stories, for instance, revolve around rewarding brutality and evil and punishing good deeds. It makes those stories feel super real and super visceral. Joe Abercrombie has made an entire career on writing stories that are really good like this. There are grimdark creators, though, that are less talented, that when they say nothing with their themes, and a lot of times it seems like they're endorsing this kind of reality. And you need to be really careful with things like this. Make sure that the villains in the story are not speaking for you. Make it seem like those are not mouthpieces for you as an author.
So what are some core themes? You think of the classic good versus evil, like Lord of the Rings. Fatalism versus free will, revenge or justice tales, identity, like Wild Robot, reaping what you sow. And the last one would be the destruction of self, or also we call false omnipotence. And essentially it's like narrow-mindedness. Who came to mind was actually Wayland from Prometheus. A lot of his actions are fear-driven because he wants to live forever, essentially. These characters in these stories, they're basically acting like they know everything. There is nothing else, and the things that they are doing are completely justified because they understand the stakes in the world, when the narrative is actually going to show them how wrong they are. So a quick example of basically breaking down a theme. I wanted to take a trilogy of movies that I love and adore. Rise, Dawn, and War for the Planet of the Apes. Those three are really good trilogy that explore what it means to be human. So in Rise, the first movie, there's a theme that I hit on earlier about causality and consequences. Basically, humans have inadvertently created smart apes because they were trying to cure Alzheimer's. In Dawn, the sequel, there is the theme of tribalism that's explored. So essentially, they went from a consequence, and then that theme has evolved into, there are two groups now who are intelligent, and they both see themselves as correct, and they want to survive, and they want to continue on. And then in War, the third movie, it explores this dehumanization, and it's basically a breakdown of morality. And then what's really actually sad about it is the humans become more like apes. There's a virus that is around, and the humans start to lose their ability to speak. So they become more animalistic. And Caesar the ape is now tested to whether he will become more human and show mercy to humans, or he'll become more of like an animal and stoop down to that level. Really interesting themes. Definitely check out those three movies if you want to explore some nuance within theme and seeing how it starts in one place and really evolves to something completely different, but also related.
Now, I can't necessarily tell you how to write a theme because a lot of this will come down to some kind of argument that is important to your life. And if I told you, like, here is how to write a good theme, it just wouldn't be authentic. A lot of these themes have to be deep and personal to you. Otherwise, they don't have a lot of that power. But one of the ways to structure these themes, once you have one that you would like to talk about, is you can give your character a flaw that is directly related to that theme. If you want to talk about human greed, you will make your main character greedy. Or if you want to talk about love and connection, you can have a character that is very closed and won't talk to other people. Then you will structure your conflict and your main plot beats to smash into that flaw that the character has. And then in the climax, they basically have to decide if they are going to overcome this flaw or if they're not. A lot of this is just mimicking a lot of what the hero's journey talks about already. But when you are approaching this with theme, you need to look at specifically the flaws. And in the resolution of your story, you have to decide whether this truth that they learned, whether it brings them pain or whether it brings them happiness and love. There are thematic truths that don't necessarily end in a happy ending. And some of those truths can be the strongest truths. You have to just make sure that you're doing these things on purpose and not conflicting against the theme that you've been talking about the whole story.
Theme is so much wrapped up into what the author is living through at the time that they write it. When you're looking at Tolkien, he had just come out of World War I, of course inspired by a lot of the tragedy and surviving those events. And you compare him to someone like George R.R. Martin, who did not serve time. So of course his worldview is already going to be different. The same can go for Tolkien being raised Catholic and Martin being also raised Catholic, but now agnostic. Those types of ideas are of course immediately going to inject themselves into the story they're writing. Even if you weren't intending to write something with like an agnostic perspective, it almost comes out in the story that you're trying to tell while you're writing it or while you're plotting it. The Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. This was written in the pre-civil rights era. Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf was a post-World War London. Brave New World by Huxley. That one is in the Industrial Revolution, and a lot of that theme was critiquing that exact thing and the assembly of the perfect human. Same with a lot of these really cool retro thrillers that we read today that were from the Cold War era, like Catch-22, The Day of the Jackal, The Manchurian Candidate, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. All of these were quite scary at the time, and now they seem really fun and cool. Theme, if you intend it or not, sometimes it's just going to work its way in because we are all bound by the time that we are inhabiting and the events that are going on around us. So don't shy away from that. lean into it and tell a really good story that is going to reflect how you feel about the current events that you're living through.
So now we get to what I would call the theme of this video, which to me is approaching this idea of why a lot of these modern stories feel empty and feel hollow. As I said before, I think a lot of this has to do with theme, and a lot of modern authors are shying away from theme. Now, I have nothing against a lot of these popcorn flicks and a lot of these entertaining stories. A lot of them can be really fun, but when approaching art, those stories that you remember, those stories that stick with you, have that theme.
Paddington 2 is incredible.
T.S. Eliot approaches this by saying, no poet, no artist of any art has his complete meaning alone. You must set him for contrast and comparison among the dead. Every new work alters the tradition that precedes it and is shaped by it. Art exists in a living continuum, a constant conversation with what came before and what will come after. So I urge people to say something with their stories. Be a part of this conversation, speak into it, and don't just write the next story that will be forgotten the next day. And to quote Pierce Brown, we will all die and the universe will carry on without a care. All that we have is that shout into the wind.
There are plenty of other authors that would wholeheartedly agree with what T.S. Eliot said. When asked, do you consciously, intentionally plan and place symbolism in your writing? Isaac Asimov said, consciously, heavens no. Unconsciously, how can one avoid it? So take what these authors are saying and try to apply it to your writing and think, how can I sit with the themes that really resonate with me and put them into a story that other people can really glean what I have felt when I was writing these things or writing these events or creating these characters. That's what's going to give them life. So we hope this helps, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Hey guys, if you really like this video, check the one down below. You might like that one too.
And if you really like what you see, click here to subscribe.